the struggles that I've had, if I can share that story and influence somebody else, then it's worth it. I'd rather take the brunt of that and have somebody else have their life be just a smidge better. It gives me satisfaction just to know that I've helped somebody.
This is Running for Real, the podcast for runners who know that for every runner's high, there are just as many lows. All those just missed PRs, easy runs that feel hard, injury blues, and more. Each week, we'll talk to running, health, and wellness experts about their highs, lows, and best advice to build our confidence. Running for Real is about being honest, being brave, and most of all, not feeling alone. And now here's our host, whose bucket list now includes visiting the Ice Cream Museum, Tina Muir.
Hello, my friends, and welcome to episode 69 of the Running for Real podcast. Thank you so much for being here today. I have a special one for you, and I think you're going to love it. So before we get to that, last week I had sports psychologist Kim Dawson on the show, who gave us fantastic advice for how to handle a lot of the mental struggles that we might deal with in training and racing and just in life. Kim has worked with a lot of Olympians, and if she's good enough to help them achieve these incredible things, I think she can be there for us too. So go back and take a listen if you haven't Go back and take a listen if you've missed that one last week and go and check it out. My guest today is such a wonderful, genuine person who I've thought about having on for a while because I love how real he is, in addition to being really fast. He is the perfect person for this podcast, and I know you're going to love him. Matt Llano has run 2:12 in the marathon, 1:01 in the half marathon, and competed for the US in the World Half Marathon Championships. Now, you know how important one of those races is for me, and that was also one of his big events, so this was really cool to hear about. Although he's struggled with injuries over the past few years, and he's real about these in the show, he's kept fighting, and we know the results will pay off for him. I want to take a moment to thank everyone, all of you who have shared this podcast with your family, your friends, your running communities, anyone who has tagged me on your social media. I truly appreciate it, and you are helping me to grow this podcast, so thank you from the bottom of my heart. So after a quick word from our sponsors, we'll be right to the episode with Matt. This episode of the Running for Real podcast is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv provides audio-based workouts created by certified personal trainers available through a mobile app. New members get 30% off an annual membership by visiting aptiv.com/running for real. That's aaptiv.com/running for real. That's the number 4, running for real. Thank you to Hoka One for sponsoring this episode of Running for Real. Hoka One is a running shoe unlike any other. A little different, right? And maybe you're unsure if you'll like them. Well, once you run in their newest release, the Clifton 5, you will see what all the buzz is about. It has marshmallow soft cushion and marshmallow lightweight to keep you comfortable throughout the day. Matt, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of the Running for Real podcast. I am really excited to talk to you. You're someone I've seen from afar, and I know we have a lot of mutual friends, and I'm actually looking forward to actually speaking to you, not just hearing about you. So thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is a cool format too, so I can actually have a conversation with you and see you on video chat. And then I guess not everybody will be able to see that, but at least for us to have a real conversation, that's kind of a cool element.
Exactly. And that's why I pretty much always insist on my guests doing that. And people are like, why do you even need that? But exactly that reason, you can have a conversation rather than when you're on the phone, it's too easy to get distracted or do something else while you're talking. So gives the listeners a better interview as well. So, okay, I've talked a lot in the intro about what you've been able to do, you know, running 1:01 in the half marathon, which is going to blow a lot of the runners listening's mind, 2:12 in the full. But you weren't always, you know, this super standout kind of the runners that we hear about at the top level who kind of are, you know, beating everyone else as kids. They win every single race they do, but you kind of came up later in your running. So maybe you could share a bit about that and when you realized, actually, maybe I do have something special.
Yeah, I kind of had a little bit of a later start in running. So I dabbled with it a little bit in elementary school. I did an after-school program where you could run laps around this field and collect little index cards for every lap that you ran, and then you could trade it in at the end of the year for like prizes of, whatever it was at the time, stuffed animals or like little trinkets and things. So that was kind of my first introduction, but it never really stuck at the time. And then other than that, it was just, I ran to stay in shape for other sports. I ran to stay in shape for soccer. I was a swimmer. I played basketball, baseball, just did all kinds of sports as a kid. And then as I got closer to high school, I started to hone that down a little bit. I realized I didn't really have a passion for soccer. So I eventually gave that up. Swimming was really hard and I didn't love it. So I kind of eventually gave that up. And then running was this thing that I found that I was passionate about, even though I wasn't good at it at the time. I started out as a sprinter in high school. So I've run everything from like the 55 dash up to the marathon now, except for hurdling events. So it was never something that I just did because I was good at it. It was something I did because I loved doing it. And I had a really good coach in high school that I was fortunate to start me out on my journey. And then kind of just meandering through high school and into college. It was just, again, it was something that I liked doing. So for me, the reward was never like, can I win this race? Did I win that race? Did I run this time? It was just like a sense of personal fulfillment that I was doing something that I liked to do. Yeah. I was continuing to improve at it. So it was like, I could see the benefits of all the hard work that I was putting in, which is something that I really liked. And then it was probably my sophomore year in cross country when I started to think a little bit more long-term with running. I made NCAAs as an individual that year in cross country.
Is that right?
At University of Richmond. Yep. In Virginia, the Spiders. And, I think that was kind of the first time that I saw a little glimmer that I could maybe continue to do this long-term. And so from there, I kind of recommitted to it a little bit more completely than I even had before. Sat down with my coach that year and I said, look, I want to make this a long-term pursuit. What can we do? And he was really open to it. I think he'd kind of been waiting for me to like broach that subject with him. He was a professional marathoner back in his day too, Steve Taylor. So in the late 80s and early 90s. So he kind of knew what the lifestyle was like and what it took to get to that next level. And so he helped me kind of start to get on that path. And then from there, again, I just continued improving. So I just kept doing it and I've had some bumps along the way, but now it's like this sense of accomplishment that I'm striving for every day and in every race. And it's more personal than anything else, but it's what keeps me getting out the door every day. Yeah,
I love that. And have you managed to keep a lot of the, you mentioned in the early days, it wasn't about the times, the pace, all that kind of stuff, about the enjoyment. Have you managed to keep that as you've moved to being a professional, or has that been difficult to not let the numbers kind of draw you in?
It can be hard at times because so much of professional running is performance based, and it's, how fast have you run to hit this contract bonus, or, did you win this race and get enough prize money to pay your next bill? And, there's all these other things that come into it. So it definitely puts a little bit more pressure on it. I've generally performed well under pressure, like academically, and in some of the other areas of my life. So I feel like that has kind of carried over a little bit into my running as well. And I like to think that if I'm really gunning for a particular race, that generally I tend to do pretty well and maybe come fairly close to my goal. But there's always something to be gained, whether you achieve the goal or not. So that's kind of how I see it. Yeah. So whether I'm still hitting all of those marks or not, I think it's like there's a worthiness in the pursuit for each individual person, and that's kind of how I see it. But again, like there have been times that I haven't enjoyed it, and I've had, particularly in the last 2.5 years, I've had some struggles with some injuries and just some other stuff going on. And so that's made it more challenging. And there have been days that I'm like, man, do I want to keep doing this? Am I ready to be done? Am I ready to move on to something else? But at the end of the day, it always comes back to, my answer to that question is always no. I'm not ready to move on. Yeah. I still have things I want to achieve. I'm still passionate about the sport. I still love the workouts. I still love the races. And so as long as I still have that piece of it, I'm going to keep pushing forward, and hopefully just all the pieces will come together in the end.
Yeah. And it may not, like you said, the last few years may have been ups and downs, but a lot of the pieces have come together at lower levels, and you're always striving to be better, but it has come together in the past. And I think it will in the future, because it's kind of the same as what everyone out there is dealing with. You know, you're just putting the work in, you're making sure that you're enjoying it as much as you can, and trusting that it'll come together when it's ready. And I think it will. And one thing that I love about you, Matt, is that you're very honest and open about your life. You know, I really want to talk later about something that you're really passionate about, living the life you want to live. And we'll get into that in a bit. But, you know, you've always said that you believe other professional runners and other runners who are maybe influencers should open up about where they are, kind of how they're feeling. Do you have any thoughts on why a lot of runners don't do that, even though I feel like it is getting better? Why professional runners would struggle with that when it may seem like a no-brainer to someone who is maybe, you know, at a recreational level?
Well, I think that starting off, I wouldn't necessarily say that like it's my place to tell people that they should or should not do something. Yeah. I personally am an advocate of it. I don't really see all that much of a downside. But I do know that for a lot of other runners, it's kind of this vulnerability factor. And they feel that if they open up about whatever it might be, issues in their personal life or injury struggles or mental health issues or anything like that, I feel like they feel like their competitors can use it to gain an advantage over them. And I think that that's probably the biggest piece of it. I've seen Meb talk about in the past about, you know, never sharing anything, any of the details of when he's injured, because he knows that his competitors can use that against him. Obviously he's retired now, so maybe he's not using that anymore. But I remember in the last couple of years, he did talk about that. A lot of times you'll see it with runners anyway. You'll see when things are going well, they're very active on social media. Yeah. They're very outgoing. They want to do the podcast. They want to do interviews. When things aren't going well, they go silent typically.
Yes.
And even Kyle Merber put up a post the other day, maybe just yesterday, I think it was on Instagram, about how difficult it was to stay active on social media when you're injured. And I think it's just part of that concept of runners not really wanting to be vulnerable when they're in this like state of, you know, vulnerability. I don't know.
Like identity crisis, essentially, because you're like, what am I other than run it?
Right. And, you know, for me, it's like, I think that there's a lot of power in relatability. And I think that being real, and I mean, I guess this is all about what we're talking about, but being real and being open is kind of just something that I've struggled with it at times, but I'd like to think that in the last 5 years, particularly, I've gotten a lot better at it. And I just feel like there can be so much power in sharing your story and how it can affect so many people for the better. And so my thought is that if I can do that and help some people, and I know that I have all the messages that I get still all the time, that it's kind of something that I'm passionate to do. And it kind of transcends the running. It transcends whether or not I run 2:10, even though that's still a goal I really want to achieve. It's bigger than whether I make the Olympic team. It's, you know, these are all things that I love and that I really aspire to do. But I also want to affect my community in a positive way. And so that's kind of something that I've taken on personally, and it gives my running kind of a greater purpose. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think when I interviewed Kyle Merber at the beginning of the year, he actually talked about that exact thing, that professional runners, kind of the future is essentially, the future of the sport is in the hands of professional runners, and people need to fall in love with the person, not just their results. And I think that's, you know, part of this whole thing is the more you can share and share the whole you, rather than just, this is me winning or this is me being successful, the more people are going to kind of feel for you and want to keep paying attention to the sport. So it's great. And, you know, you did one of the biggest things that would have been the scariest for you was being the first professional runner to come out as gay. Now, tell us a bit about how scary, that was with sharing that part of your journey. And I'm sure you've had a heck of a response. You mentioned about people messaging you. I'm sure that's a huge part of that. But tell us about the decision to do that and what made you pull the trigger.
Yeah. So in 2013 in December, I had just kind of finished, or was kind of coming off of a fall season of I had been injured that spring into the summer, and then I had done 4 or 5 races that fall, and felt like things were improving. I was getting healthy again. I was starting to compete again. And I just felt like this heaviness, there was this weight on my shoulders that for a while I couldn't figure out what it was. But I was kind of determined to try and nail it down and try and lift that. And then kind of eventually what I came to was just this realization that I wasn't being honest. I wasn't being open and authentic with most of my friends, with my teammates, with my coach at the time, with the fans that we had. I just was kind of living this very closed off life with all these walls that I had built up for 20 some years. And so I decided the easiest way for me to address it was to write a blog post.
Yep.
So I just sat down on my computer and just poured out some words onto, I'm not particularly gifted with words, I don't think, but I poured them out onto a page. And I was actually on my way to a race, and I had to drive down to Phoenix for the flight. So I hit post right before I left for the drive. It was about a 2 or 2.5 hour drive. And then I turned my phone off, and I just did this drive. It was terrifying. I just didn't know.
Of you like, oh, I got to turn it back on, or like,
there was a part of me, but I think the fear kind of overrode that. And I was kind of terrified because I didn't know how a lot of people would react, and nobody in the running world had ever come out before. And so I didn't know. I mean, I generally think that runners are pretty accepting, pretty open-minded people for the most part, but I just wasn't sure what that reception was going to be. And so there's always this fear of that unknown, and just not knowing, like you're putting yourself out there, and like we were just talking about, you're opening yourself up, you're being vulnerable. You don't know how people are going to respond. And when I got to the airport, I had to turn my phone on to get my boarding pass. And so I was like flooded with messages, and most of them were supportive, which was awesome. And I choose to kind of focus on that. There have been a lot of negative things as well. Even just recently, I don't go on message boards ever. I learned that lesson back in college. I never go on the message boards, but I had, before I made an announcement a couple weeks ago, I had people speculating about a couple things, and friends were sending me these messages on message boards. And I was like, what is this? I don't want to see these. What are you sending me? But then curiosity kind of got the best of me a little bit. And I did look at it, and I think maybe they've been removed. I didn't look since, but, even there, like, and this perfectly illustrates why I was so fearful, but, even there, like, this decision that I recently made had nothing to do with my sexuality or anything about that. And, there were a number of homophobic comments that were made, and it's like, it makes you really understand why people don't open up. And for me, I think I do a pretty good job of blocking that stuff out. And sure, like, it bothered me for a couple hours, and I went and ran a workout actually right after I had seen that. And I think it helped fuel my workout a little bit. I crushed it, as they say. But yeah, I think I've done, just from growing up, I kind of learned to deal with some of that stuff a lot, unfortunately, through school, and not always necessarily being like the most popular kid. So I've learned to kind of turn that around and use it as fuel, and focus more on the positives. I generally like to think I'm a pretty optimistic person. Things can get me down, and I am an emotional person. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. And so it's pretty easy to tell if something is bothering me. And generally when that happens, I just kind of revert to what I used to do. And I just shut down. So that did happen a little bit in the last couple of weeks. But I think generally, it's been really well received, and I received, I don't even know, hundreds of messages. Every week someone new reaches out to me on Instagram or Twitter or via email. And it's like, it makes it all worth it. It makes it, the struggles that I've had, if I can share that story and help somebody else and influence somebody else, then it's worth it. I'd rather take the brunt of that and have somebody else have their life be just a smidge better because of it. And so for me, that, again, like I said before, it gives my running bigger purpose. It gives myself, it gives me satisfaction just to know that I've helped somebody. Yeah. So it makes the whole journey, the ups and the downs, all worth it in the end.
Absolutely. And I'm so glad to hear you say that. And a lot of what you're saying, I definitely feel like a lot of the listeners will know that that's pretty much exactly what I would say if I was asked in an interview. I don't know how much you know, Matt, about my story, but I did kind of a similar thing with speaking out just over a year ago about not having a period for 9 years, got the discussion going, and it was terrifying. Same kind of thing. Decided to write a blog post, posted it. My website crashed in the end because it couldn't handle the volume. And you're absolutely right that knowing you're helping people is it makes it all worth it. And receiving the messages, I'm sure there's lives that you've saved through this, indirectly by making people feel like they're not so alone. So on behalf of those people, I want to thank you for doing what you did. And is there anything you would say to someone listening who might be kind of going through this right now, feels that kind of weight on their shoulders? What should they do? Give them some advice on how to kind of be brave enough to maybe even share it with just family and friends. Maybe they haven't told anyone yet.
Yeah, it can be kind of hard, and it's such an individual journey for every person, because people come from so many different backgrounds and have all these different challenges. And so it's very different person to person, but sometimes, honestly, it can be easiest to talk to somebody you don't know all that well, which might sound kind of weird, but I found that some of the hardest conversations that I had before I posted the blog post in the couple years prior to that, some of the hardest conversations that I had where I was trying to open up to people and tell them that I'm gay were with the people that I was closest to. And I don't know, I think it's probably a fear of rejection, a fear that you're going to just be pushed aside and
relationships
unloved and ruining relationships. And so, but I think that, eventually I think if you can work up to a point where you can talk to your close friends and family, it gets so much better. It gets so much easier every time you have the conversation. And so it's not an easy thing to start. I think the first couple of times I tried to say it, the words would come up to my throat, and then they would get stuck right there. And then I would start crying, and it was really hard. It's really emotional. It's these things that for me, I came out for the first time to anyone on my 21st birthday, back in 2009. And, that's 21 years of bottled up emotions, and it's 21 years of suppressing, just this big aspect of who you are. And so it's not something that comes easily for a lot of people. But yeah, I would just say kind of process it in your own time. Don't let other people force you to be ready for something that maybe you're not quite ready for yet. That's a discussion I've had with a few other people over the last couple of years. And a lot of people are like, oh, we need this person to come out in this sport, and we need this, and it's or just in life in general. And it's everybody's on a different path, and everybody should have the opportunity to decide for themselves how they want it to happen, when they want it to happen, who they want to talk to, all that stuff. And so it's not something that I think should be forced, but I think for me and for a lot of people that I've talked to, there's this, you eventually reach this point where you're just like, okay, I'm ready. And it kind of comes out of nowhere. And that's kind of how it happened for me when I wrote that blog post. It was I was leaving, like I said, I was leaving for this race, and I was it was this epiphany. All of a sudden I was like, okay, now's the time. I'm ready. I have to do it now, or I'm not going to do it. And so that was kind of what somewhat impulsively had me write the blog post. And I didn't pour over it for days. I didn't worry about editing it. I don't know if there are typos in it. I haven't really read it since. But it was just something that I felt like I needed to get off my shoulders right then and there. And if I didn't, I didn't know how much longer I would have just held it in. And so I think, just knowing that you're eventually going to get to a point where you're going to be ready for it. You're going to be comfortable for it or comfortable with it. And it's scary, but in the end, I think that everything kind of sorts itself out, and you figure out like who supports you and who you want to have around you. And I think that that's an important part of it too, because we live just in the society that we live. It's a polarizing subject. So not everybody's going to be on your side. And I think that acknowledging that ahead of time and being okay with that, coming to terms with that, is kind of part of that process. But it's so much better on the other side. I think it's so worth it to just lift this weight off your shoulders and to be open and to be who you are, and whatever that might be. And there's stereotypes of what different people should be like. And I don't think everybody fits into those boxes. And that's okay. That's okay too. Yeah. So I think, just finding the peace with yourself, and then just finding even just one person to share it with at first. Yeah. It starts there, and then it kind of snowballs after that. And it gets easier every time afterwards. Yep.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure that will help some of the listeners out there really to kind of understand and where things have to be for them to speak out as well. So how, coming into your professional career, you said that this just happened a few years ago, or more than a few years ago now, but
I'm getting old.
No. How important, actually, on that note, you are literally 5 days older than me. That's it.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah, so you're about to turn 30.
What are you, the 26th or 27?
No, you're older than me. I'm the 6th.
Oh, yeah. So, August 6th.
And I was researching you. I was like, he's about to turn 32.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep, we're getting old.
Yes.
But,
not that excited about this birthday.
You are excited?
No, I'm not. I'm not a big birthday
actually quite
person,
excited.
But
yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like suddenly
I guess it's a new chapter.
Yeah.
Getting into your 30s.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'll embrace it. I've got like 2 weeks to embrace it.
Yeah, there you go. We might wake up wise. That's what I'm hoping anyway.
Yeah.
Okay. So how important was it to find a company to work with, a sponsor that, really was going to support the whole you? I'm assuming, having taken that brave decision to speak out and wanting to, follow your career in the way that you believed was best was important. So you ended up, working with Hoka, One, who are actually sponsoring this podcast episode. So why them? Like, what was it about them that really kind of resonated with you?
Well, I think, like you said, it was an important part of, painting the complete picture of me at the time. In 2013, when I came out, I didn't have a sponsor. So for me, it was that. And that was, I think, part of why it was a little bit scary too, is because I just wasn't sure if that was going to close down opportunities for me professionally. And thankfully, I don't think that it did. Again, we talked a little bit at the beginning of the podcast about how I think runners are generally a pretty open community. And so I think that kind of helped a little bit, because I would say that all the companies that we talked to really seemed to kind of want me to embrace this part of who I am. And there are a couple companies that have campaigns specifically designed for like Pride collections, which I think is really cool. And it's something that I've been communicating with one of my sports marketing managers about, trying to kind of open up that discussion with Hoka as well. But when my agent first went to Hoka about me, they actually, one of the things that they loved was my story, was my background. And so, I think that was an important thing. They're like, we love his story. We want him on board. We want to help tell that story. And so it's been great to work with them and to feel really supported as the complete athlete and complete person, rather than just saying, did you make the last Olympic team? Then, if so, we're going to keep you on. If not, you're done. Which isn't necessarily how other companies work either. But I think that I had this perception that was how it was going to be. But I'm grateful that we're kind of in this social media era. We're kind of in this age of storytelling. And I think that everybody has a story, whether we acknowledge it or not. Everybody has a story. Everybody has things and experiences that have brought them to wherever they are today. And so for some people, that might be being a mom or being a dad, or for some people, it might be having a firefighting career in addition to having a running career. And of course, I'm speaking of some former teammates of mine, but these are just some things that have really resonated with me and have inspired me to keep telling my story, because it's something that is fairly unique to me. And again, if it's like we talked about before, it's a little niche of the running community that I feel I can help to make a difference with. And so Hoka has been really good about helping me amplify that message and helping me tell that story. And we're working on a lot of things behind the scenes that hopefully will eventually come forward and, help to, bring it to light even more. So it's cool to work with a small company that's willing to do those kinds of things. Yeah.
Well, they're supporting you as a person rather than just you for your performances, which is great. And that's one of the reasons I do really like the brand as a whole. And I featured a lot of Hoka athletes on this podcast over time. And that's one of the reasons why. And diving deeper into, looking into you a bit more as this episode was coming up, I did notice that your favorite shoe of the Hoka shoes are the Clifton 5s. And the Clifton 5 happened to be or I guess when you wrote it, probably was the Clifton 4, but the Clifton 5 is what they are kind of promoting with this episode, but it's your favorite shoe. Now, I have said on this kind of with the ads for this campaign that when I first saw those Clifton 5s, or any Hoka shoes for that matter, I was a little bit like, these are strange looking. I'm not sure about this, but I tried them and loved them. So I'd love for you to tell the listeners maybe your initial thoughts and then what you think now.
Yeah, I think most people greet Hokas with a little bit of skepticism. The first time that I opened a box of them, I was a little bit skeptical as well. I had just gotten so used to running in other, what you might call in quotes, like more traditional shoes. And I was so used to that, what fit into that box, that I was a little bit less open-minded than maybe I should have been. But then my mind was just like the flip of a switch was changed when I put the shoe on. And that's what most people say. Well, it kind of starts when people take it out of the box because it's so lightweight.
Yeah.
It's like, you think it's going to be a brick based on, just kind of what it looks like, but it's so lightweight when you pick it up and people are like, oh, I have one of my friends works at a running store, and his method of selling Hokas at the time, a couple years ago, was if somebody questioned it or if they were a little bit unsure about it, he would take it off the wall and he would toss it to them, just kind of spontaneously throw it to them. And when they caught it and just realized how light it was, that was kind of his way of getting them to be willing to try them on, and like he had a huge success rate with that. And so clever. It's kind of just like a funny, it's kind of just like a funny story of how he wanted to introduce it to other people, and it worked. And so I think that that's something that happened with me too. As soon as I took it out of the box, it changed my mind. And then when I put it on my foot and ran in it, I was like, oh, okay, now I see why this is catching on. I see why so many people are starting to convert to Hoka. And that was 3 or 4 years ago. And so now they've just really been advancing the technology. They're on the Clifton 5 now, which just released, I think, on June 21st, maybe. So that's quickly become my go-to shoe. Now it's like my everyday trainer. But even more than that, I think part of what I love about the Clifton is it's so versatile, because like I can use it as an everyday trainer in just my shorter, kind of everyday runs, easy runs, recovery runs, and that kind of thing. But I've also on occasion used it for workouts and hard long runs. If I've been a little bit scatterbrained in the morning and forgotten my flats, like in my car or at my house or something, I'm like, well, I don't have a choice. I have to wear the Clifton today. And I perform just as well on those days as I do if I change into, a racing flat or a training flat. So I think that's part of what I love about it. It's just the versatility of being able to use it on a road, on a trail, in a workout, on an easy run, just kicking around town. Like it's super comfortable just to wear like to a coffee shop, it's just, it's a really versatile shoe. And I think that's the biggest thing that I like about it.
Cool. Well, hopefully that's people sold with that now. And if you do want to take advantage of that, remember you can use code running4real with the number 4 to get free expedited shipping. All right, let's change gears here. Talk about something that I know quite a few of my community members have experienced. If not, unfortunately, there's a good chance that this could happen to any of us. Being in 2011, you were hit by a car and ended up with a TBI, a traumatic brain injury. So maybe tell us about, maybe you don't want to obviously relive it, but how did you recover from that? How much time off did you need? Tell us what happened with that.
Yeah, I was remarkably lucky actually in that incident. It was back in 2011. I had just graduated from college in May of that year. And then I stayed for NCAAs. And so I was basically at college through the end of June. And then that summer I was trying to figure out what I was going to do as far as continuing to run professionally. So I signed a contract with a group and I was supposed to move out to Minnesota 2 days before I ended up being hit by the car. And so obviously that changed my plans a little bit, but the result was like, I didn't break anything. I did have the brain injury. I had some bleeding in my brain, but didn't break anything, which I was really fortunate about. So took off a couple weeks, made sure that everything with CT scans and all that everything was coming back normal. And then just kind of really gradually started building back into running and moved out to Minnesota, joined the training group there. And it was kind of a slow build back up, but by probably, so this was in August, this was August 20th, I believe, of 2011. And by that following January, just a couple months later, I felt pretty normal again. So I had seen a lot of therapists in Minnesota. We were fortunate to have access to chiropractors and doctors and physical therapists and all that kind of stuff. We were fortunate to have that as part of our support.
That's good.
So I think that was a massive help. And I definitely took advantage of it, especially just having been where I was that previous couple months. So, I was fortunate to come back pretty quickly, but it was also something I wanted to make sure that I respected and didn't force my body to do something that I wasn't ready for. And so I just kind of took my time with it and eventually found that workouts were getting a little bit faster. I was starting to feel a little bit better on recovery days. And so that was kind of when I opened up myself to the idea of starting to race again. And then I did and ran my first half marathon and then just kind of got back into it after that.
Mm-hmm. And has it kind of affected you in any other way since? I know you do get some headaches from time to time, but does it ever worry you in your training or when you're out running and you see a car maybe kind of looking like they're not going to see you? Do you kind of jump back or like, how has that changed things for you?
Yeah, I kind of have a hyper awareness now of cars. And I think runners aren't always the smartest people when it comes to like navigating their way through traffic. Yeah. And so, you see, even if you're out driving or if you're out riding a bike or something, you'll see runners darting across intersections and running across roads between cars, kind of like a Frogger scenario. Yeah, and it's just like, I don't do that anymore. I'm way more cautious than I used to be. And I run with a road ID. So it has like my name, my parents' phone numbers, my best friend's phone number, where I live, and just it has some basic information about me so that if it were to happen again, I would be kind of covered. I think in that initial incident, this was before I discovered road ID. In my initial incident, I was really lucky that I was knocked unconscious, and I don't remember this at all, but I was told after the fact that somehow I was just reciting my mom's phone number to the paramedics. And I don't remember it. I totally blacked out. I have no recollection of the accident. I just remember like running beforehand. And then I remember waking up in the hospital afterwards. But what I was told was that I was reciting my mom's phone number. So I don't know where that came from. I don't know how I was able to like pull that when I was unconscious, but it was something that I was able to apparently tell the paramedics, and they called my parents, and my parents got to where I was, and it made the whole thing go a lot more smoothly than it could have otherwise if I had gone to the hospital and they didn't know who I was, and they didn't know if I was allergic to anything. They didn't know anything about me, really. So to have that vital piece of being able to bring my parents there is now something that I don't take for granted. And so I'll always wear the road ID at this point, because it just, it's just a little thing. It's just like a little bracelet that gives so much information and can save your life.
I do have a road ID as well, and I will put links in the show notes for anyone. If you do want to get one of those, I definitely would recommend it. And I wonder if you would have, or anyone would have been able to do the same thing now, because, even in 2011, I feel like we still kind of remembered phone numbers, but now would we? Like, I feel like I do know my mum's number, but I don't know if I would know it enough to, I don't know. It's interesting to think about whether it would have changed in that 7 years. So
yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't really thought about that at the time, and most numbers I don't commit to memory, but there are just certain ones that for whatever reason you just remember them. Even I have phone numbers in my past, like that I remember that there's no reason that I should remember them, but it's like it occupies this space in my mind for some reason. And I don't know. It's kind of a weird thing, but I think you're right. I think now, with as much as we rely on our phones for maps and contacts and, all these different things, I think it would probably be a lot harder to recite that off the top of your
scary,
head.
Actually, thinking about it. But okay, let's switch to something a bit more, I don't want to say exciting, but positive, as you and I, both optimistic people. One thing when I was reading up on you is you said you're really passionate about living the life you want to live, which I loved hearing you say that. But what does that mean?
Oh, it can mean a lot of different things. To me, I just gave a talk about this at a running camp a couple weeks ago. I think for me, it's just, it's multifaceted, but I think it's being true to who you are is part of it. I think it's doing things that you love to do, whether you're getting rewarded for it or not. So rewards being, money or whatever, fame or Twitter followers, Instagram, whatever it might be, like just doing something because you love doing it, not because it's what somebody else is telling you to do, not because it's what you think you should do, for some other reason, because that's what society is telling you or something like that. But just finding something that you genuinely love to do, that just is like, it lights your fire. It makes you forget to check your phone. It just like is what feels like your purpose is. And I think we get really caught up in the stigma of like, oh, well, and I even fall into this a little bit sometimes when I say like, oh, I'm just a runner. And it's like, no, but it's a worthy pursuit, and it's, I'm not just a runner. I'm a runner who's trying to inspire a community. I'm a runner who's trying to make an Olympic team. I'm trying to make world championship teams. And there's so much to it that I think it's easy to brush it aside. And I've had conversations with people over the years that have said, you need to get a real job. And I think runners hear that a lot. And it's like,
when you're talking to someone, then they say,
and it's like,
oh, he just runs. Or
he's just a runner. He does, he doesn't actually have a job. And I'm like, no, this is my job. I get paid to do this. And I think that if you can find something that you love to do and you can make a living doing it, I think that that's awesome. And I don't think that there's anybody that should tell you that it's wrong, and so that's kind of, I mean, it's fairly simple for me, but I think it's like finding whatever that worthy pursuit is for you. And it's different for everyone. Like for some people, it's going to be being a mom. I mean, we talked about this a little bit, but being a mom, or might be being a doctor, or like being a veterinarian or a stay-at-home dad, like whatever. There are so many different things it could be. And I just think that we should figure out what that is for us and what makes us really happy. And I think that if we had more people doing things that made them happy, instead of just doing things that make them money, or just doing things, like I said, that they think that other people want them to do, then I think that the world might be a little bit of a different place, maybe a little bit of a happier place.
Absolutely. And I remember specifically being in college and someone at my university was doing pharmacy, and I said, "Oh, why are you doing pharmacy?" And their response was, "Well, it makes six figures." And I was like, "What? Like, you're going through all this studying, all these years of, being in education, and you're doing it because it makes six figures." Like, I was just like, I don't understand what you're saying. Like, why would you do that if you don't enjoy the subject and have interest in it? So for someone who, you said you running is a passion of yours, or you love to do it, but someone listening who maybe is, well, I'm just a recreational runner, I'm a middle or back of the pack runner. Maybe that isn't being a professional runner like Matt might be, but it could be, you get into coaching, or you find a way to volunteer at events on the weekend, or apply for a job working at the Chicago Marathon or something like that. Do you agree that there's other ways you can kind of be creative to stay within that passion area, even if, you or I might say, well, I want to be a basketball player, and realistically, we're never going to be basketball players, but, you can find other areas to work in within that specific category.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a really good point. Because, not everything is going to work for every person. And at the end of the day, like, we do have to some extent, find things that allow us to make a living. And, we have to get by day to day. So we can't always just necessarily follow our passions. Sometimes we have to mix in some other things. But I think, like you said, finding something within that realm, and allowing yourself a little bit of flexibility to find that thing that you're passionate about, but that also allows you to live a life where that's part of it. But maybe, you can also dabble in other areas, and you can live your life and support your lifestyle. I think that's a really good point. So yeah. I think, just finding something within that realm is a great place to start.
Yeah, cool.
And who knows what it might lead to.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. So when I was, reading about you, I looked onto your Twitter feed, and it was absolutely full of you raising up other teammates, other runners, other friends. And we talked at the beginning about many elite runners not showing that vulnerability, but we also see, again, getting better, a lot of elite runners don't kind of raise up their competitors or raise up people who are, now have a time faster than they do. It seemed to me like you were so excited for other runners. There was tons of tweets during Desi's Boston Marathon, but just other people, Kellen Taylor, Stephanie Bruce. There's lots of, really it seemed like you were genuinely...
appearance here. Sorry about
Matt's
that.
dog is jumping up right now. It seems like you were just genuinely so excited for other people. So why do you believe that supporting other teammates and helping get attention on other teammates and other people doing great things is going to, help us all in the long run?
Well, I think now in hindsight, there's a name for that. It's kind of the Shalane Flanagan effect, as some people call it. And she, I think that she kind of epitomizes that. I think over the last, 8 or 10 years, you've seen with the Bowerman Track Club, it started as just Shalane. And then they gradually brought in more women. And she has just been such a pioneer in supporting all of the women on her team. And I just think that it helps to elevate everyone. And you see, just particularly with them, they've had so much success. And I think that a lot of that is due to like their team culture. And I think that I just don't see, I don't see the reason that we should like tear each other down. I actually just posted something on my Instagram story, just a rap that I came across yesterday. This young kid is just doing this little rap, and I don't know if it was a freestyle or if he had written it or if it was somebody else's or what, but it was just this really inspirational message of this really positive and inspirational message of lifting other people up, and just like the effects of what that would have on a community if everyone focused more on that rather than tearing people down, or maybe just focusing inward on themselves. And, I feel like maybe it was something that was born in my high school running days. I was fortunate enough to be part of a successful high school team, where we won a couple state championships. So I think that for me, it was impressed in my mind early on that the team is something to really value, and being part of a unit is something that was really important to us. And so I think that I kind of always had that maybe subconsciously in my mind. And I knew that when I went on to run in college, it was something that I felt there too. And we got our team to the NCAA championships for the first time in like 30 some years. Actually, I think it was the first time ever as a team, first individual in like 25 years or 30 years or something like that. But, and I think then moving on from there, it was important to me that I found a team that I could surround myself with and that I could, go through the daily grind with. And I think that, just lifting other people up in my mind is just a no brainer. It makes sense to me. It's just kind of the person that I am. And so, I don't think that by lifting other people up that we stifle ourselves at all. And so that's kind of just part of what I hope other people will start to do as well. And I think that if we can have more people in the running community as a whole, whether at the professional level or recreational level or kids in high school or kids in elementary school, whatever it might be, I think just getting more people to focus on positive things rather than, oh, well, this person ran faster than me and I don't like them because of that. Like, it's just silly. It's, at the end of the day, like, we're all people, like we've been talking about this whole time. And so I think that coming back to that and just understanding that we're all in this together really, is just the way that I choose to operate. And hopefully other people will be on board with that, but I know it's not everybody's cup of tea. So it's just the way that's just the way that I choose to handle the day to day. And it helps me.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's how we all should strive to be, like, regardless of whether you are someone who shares or not, there's nothing stopping you from encouraging other people. And like that old phrase says, a rising tide lifts all boats. And it's very much true. So on that note, you have been working with Northern Arizona Elite the last few years, and you have parted ways recently. So what is next, and will you be looking for that next kind of team setting to kind of, find yourself in? As you just said, you are a team player. You like to be surrounded by other people who inspire you.
Yeah. Running, it can be challenging because, like we've just talked about, I think that being part of a team is something that I've loved for so long, whether it was high school, college, post-collegiately, professionally. It was something that I've always valued, and it still is. And I'm still close with all of my former teammates, and I actually have one of them living at my house right now. And so, that hasn't changed at all. That dynamic hasn't changed. But just for me, I wanted to kind of make a change, and this kind of felt like the right time. This would give me enough time leading into the next Olympic cycle. And so I haven't quite decided yet exactly what I'm going to do. So that's kind of it's still pretty new. I just parted ways with the team about 3 weeks ago. And then I left out of town for almost 3 weeks to do some races on the East Coast. And so I haven't quite figured out the next step. I think that ultimately I would like to end up with a team, and I do have a few options in mind, but it's still a little bit too early to talk about anything. So, and there's a lot of factors that go into it that I would have to kind of figure out. So, it's just it's an exciting position right now for me to be in. I'm excited about my own running moving forward. I'm excited about the potential for new friendships and new opportunities to come. And so I think it's a good thing. Change can sometimes be scary, but I saw a saying a couple weeks ago that I really liked, and it was something along the lines of like, you can't steal second base if you keep your foot on first. And so, I liked that as just kind of a testament to like the power of change. And so that's just kind of something that I'm looking for right now and trying to navigate what those next steps might be.
Well, cool. Thank you for sharing, and definitely like that. And I want to ask you a question. You might not be able to answer this, but you've been kind of hinting that there may be a Boston Marathon coming by some pictures there.
Yeah, I mean,
are you allowed to reveal that?
I don't have any immediate plans to run it. Definitely, it's just one of those courses that I would love to get on. It's such a historic race, and so I would love to be part of it at some point. I don't know if that's going to be next year or hopefully it won't be in 2020 because I hope to be running a certain different marathon overseas. But Yeah, I mean, it's definitely in my future. A large part of the reason that I ran a couple of the races that I did this year in Boston, the BAA 5K and the BAA 10K, were so that I could get on the marathon course. So back in April, and so I could witness the marathon itself. Back in April, I ran the 5K, which is the Saturday before the Boston Marathon, which is Marathon Monday. And I stuck around, and the day after, so this was Sunday morning, I ran 22 miles of the course, and then stayed and watched Des Linden win the Boston Marathon, which was so cool. And I had a bunch of friends in that race, and it was really kind of inspiring to see in such adverse conditions how people still prevailed. And maybe it was not their best marathon objectively, like on paper, but I think to see people just pushing through and just gritting it out and still finishing in those horrific conditions was really cool. And I said after the fact, I was like, I don't know if that makes me want to run the Boston Marathon more or less. Just having that be my first like Boston Marathon experience. It was like these horrendous conditions where it was freezing, torrential downpour. And, after that morning, I was like, gosh, I was scratching my head. I'm like, I don't know if this made me want to run it more. But yeah, I mean, I got on the course and ran 22 miles of it. And then a couple of weeks ago, ran the BAA 10K. And the day after that, I ran the entire course, start to finish. I had this kind of a comical story of getting out to the starting line without a car and having, it's point to point. So I couldn't drive out and leave the car there. Yeah. Took public transport and all. It was kind of a funny story, but ended up running the whole course back, and it was awesome, and it was challenging, but I wanted to just start to familiarize myself with the course, because it is something that I will definitely do at some point in my professional career. And so it was kind of like a scouting trip of sorts, where I could see the course without actually having the pressure of racing it quite yet. Yeah.
Did you cross the finish line?
I don't think like I would stop. Yeah, I didn't run across the actual finish line. So I ran from the start, and I ran, the whole thing, all the mile markers. There are very few turns, so it's a pretty easy course to navigate. But then once I got onto Boylston Street, when I made that turn onto Boylston Street, I got up on the sidewalk. And so I ran on the sidewalk to the finish line, and then I took a picture of my watch over the finish line, but I did not actually physically cross the finish line.
I feel like I couldn't.
I feel like it's bad luck or something. I don't know. I'm not that much of a superstitious person, but I feel like that's one thing that, I don't know, people always say is bad luck.
Yeah. No, I wouldn't have done that. So I'm glad to hear you didn't, because that would have bothered me. But okay. And then just one more thing before we get on to the final 4 questions. You are one of the coaches at McKirdy Trained. Now, I'm sure almost everyone listening has heard of McKirdy Trained, James McKirdy's company by now, and just this ginormous, wonderful set of coaches and athletes that he's got. So tell us about why you decided to work for McKirdy when, I'm sure you could have either gone out on your own and had a coaching practice, or just kind of worked with someone else. Why McKirdy?
So I first met James, a couple of years ago. We kind of met virtually. We became friends on Facebook. And I was helping him out with the situation. Actually, he was one of the people that reached out to me about a friend that he had who was kind of going through a life struggle and could relate to my situation. And so he reached out on behalf of his friend and kind of wanted to connect the two of us. And that was kind of how we first initially met. And then met up in person at a couple of races and just kind of started this friendship, which over time, he eventually came and trained in Flagstaff for a little bit and now lives in Flagstaff. And so it's just kind of, this friendship blossomed, and he approached me a few years ago maybe 2 years ago about coaching for him and joining his stable of, like you said, tremendous coaches. If you look at the roster of coaches he has, it's kind of crazy. But it's cool to be part of that. And so he approached me with the idea to coach for him. And I took some time to think about it. At the time, I was coming off of one of my surgeries. And so didn't feel like it was really the right time necessarily, because I was dedicating so much time to cross training and just trying to be in the right mindset of focusing everything on running at the time. But shortly after that, I decided to just expand my little bubble a little bit and help other people to achieve their goals. And so it kind of all ties into this common theme of like wanting to help other people and wanting to lift other people up. And so I saw coaching as an opportunity to do that. And so that was just kind of how I got into it. And I don't coach a whole lot of people. It's still like kind of just something I do on the side for fun, but maybe I might eventually turn it into like a little bit of a more full-time endeavor. So I don't know. It's kind of just something that I wanted to have on the side again as a way to help some people and to have some fun. And so, that's kind of how I got into it. And that's kind of what keeps me going.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I will put links in the show notes to McCurdy Trained for anyone who is interested. Now, we're just going to take a moment to thank Hoka and thank Aptiv for sponsoring this podcast. And we'll be right back with the final four. This episode of the Running for Real podcast is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv provides audio-based workouts created by certified personal trainers available through a mobile app. What does that mean you get? Well, access to expert trainers, a flexible audio workout format so you can work out the way you like. And I've told you over and over again how important it is to listen to your body. The Aptiv trainers have a wide array of personalities so you can find the personal training style that motivates you. You know I love the gentle, be kind to yourself approach, but maybe that doesn't work for you. What is even cooler is that Aptiv's in-house music production team creates music playlists that are perfectly timed to the intensity and pace of your training. When you need a boost, the music keeps you going. When you need to back off, the music dials back with you. Aptiv also has a 5K, 10K, half and full marathon training program. And for future mamas out there, there's a full maternity program broken down by trimester so you can work out and build strength for a healthy pregnancy. Pretty cool, huh? Subscriptions start at $14.99 billed monthly or $99.99 for an annual membership, but for a limited time, new members get 30% off an annual membership by visiting aptiv.com/runningforreal. That's aaptiv.com/runningforreal with the number 4. This podcast is sponsored by Hoka One One. Have you thought about getting yourself a pair of Hoka One One shoes yet? Come on, you're tempted, aren't you? I was wondering what all the fuss was about, and now I get it. I am enjoying them so much that the Clifton 5 have become my new favourite shoe with their marshmallow soft cushion and marshmallow lightweight that will keep you comfortable throughout the day. Many of the best professional runners out there right now are wearing them for everything from training to workouts. I even think you could race in them. They are that comfortable and light, and if they're good enough for the best out there, they're definitely good enough for us. It is the sweetest cushion. Fine-tuned with new overlays and a sleek design, you can get yours today by visiting hokaoneone.com/runningforreal. That's spelled HOKAONEONE.com/runningforreal with the number 4. And you can use coupon code runningforreal, again with the number 4, for free expedited shipping to become part of the family. It's time to fly. All right, Matt, just 4 more questions for you, starting with a photo that you may have put on your social media that didn't quite show the full story. Do you have one to share with us?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Last night, I was looking through my feed a little bit. I was scrolling through and I was like, gosh, it was kind of a hard one for me to answer because I generally feel like I'm pretty open about stuff. And the closest thing that I could come to was, it wasn't necessarily any one photo in particular, but I think that sometimes my captions are a little bit more vulnerable than other times. And I think sometimes I'll just throw up a quote. And a lot of times when I put up a quote, there's some meaning behind it. There's some situation that's going on in my life that has motivated me or inspired me to use that particular quote on that particular day. And that's kind of one of the ways that I can still try to bridge the gap between, just shutting down completely and like still allowing myself to be open with my followers. And I don't always tell the full backstory behind it, but you can rest assured that there's pretty much always something. There's always a reason. There's always a reason that I've put it up. And so generally I would say the closest thing I could come to, like with like hidden backstories and stuff, is like when I put up a quote, if I don't elaborate that much, it might mean that I'm I'm needing that quote on a particular day. And so I feel like maybe somebody else might need it too. And so it's just it's an opportunity that I take to share it and hope that it might help somebody else as well. And we can kind of feel like we're kind of going through it together.
Yeah, nope, love that. And I do exactly the same thing. What about a running for real moment, a moment that only runners will get?
Gosh, I mean, I think with that one, we didn't really delve into this. I've talked about it in other podcasts, but just a little bit of my story in the last 2.5 years and just struggles with injuries and trying to overcome 3 surgeries after the Olympic trials in 2016 and coming back 10 months after a labral tear, hip surgery, and running 2:13, and just these stories of kind of overcoming, and yet it's kind of bittersweet at times because you can overcome these obstacles and still fall short of your goals, and you can still be disappointed. And I think that that's something that I'm working on because I think that I'm really hard on myself, but I think that that's not necessarily a bad thing because I think for me, it helps to motivate me. It helps to kind of pick up the pieces and get training again after a disappointing result or something like that. So I think, the biggest thing for me is just like, when you get knocked down, just getting right back up. And that's kind of been my story over the last couple of years, just through some of the injuries and some of the surgeries that I've had. And so it's not always been easy, but as I've said before, it has always been worth it, and it will continue to be worth it. So I think that's kind of like my running for real, because a lot of people wouldn't really necessarily want to talk about injuries and wouldn't want to talk about their struggles because they just want to be seen as this like machine that's infallible and that, is kind of inhuman, which none of us are. So
no, definitely. Well, thank you for sharing that. What about a high moment for you?
Oh gosh, a high moment for me was probably, so in 2013, as we discussed a little while ago, in December of 2013, I came out as openly gay, the first professional runner to do that. And then a month later, I ran the U.S. Half Marathon Championships down in Houston, middle of January. And my goal there was to maybe run something that would qualify me for the World Championships, which at the time was a top 5 finish or a fast time. And I think that with this emotional weight that had been lifted off my shoulders from the previous month, I just felt like I was running with like a lightness that I hadn't felt in a really long time. And I had this huge breakthrough race, ran my PR in the half marathon, 61:47, qualified for the World Championships, which I ran 2 months later. And I think that was just that was a high for me because it was a performance-based high for me because, it was just this big moment in my career that was kind of validating the years of work that I had put in prior. And even still now, it motivates me to get back to that level. And it's like, well, I did this, in a couple of years ago and under these adverse conditions. And I feel like it can help me to get back there. And so it's still motivating to me today and still something that I aspire to do again. And so that was kind of like one of my biggest like running highs, I would say.
No, I love that. And kind of also a bit of a screw you to anyone who said bad stuff about you. I'm not going to let you ruin my running. All right. What do you tell yourself on the start line of a race?
So I generally, before races, I like to create mantras. This is something that a couple years back I learned from Dina Castor from reading articles about her. And so it's something that she always did. And so it was kind of something that I adopted for myself. And so it might be a little bit different based on whatever the particular race is. But one of my fallbacks is always a saying that my coach in high school used to tell us before every race in cross country and every race in track. And he would huddle us up and he would give us this really like amped up emotional speech that would just get us really excited about the race. And he would always finish it. He would always punctuate it with just a really simple phrase, to be great. And that was what he always said. It was just be great. And that's just something that has always stuck with me. And sometimes if you look really close, if you have a really astute eye, you might see it written on my hand at certain races, or like written on my arm or, somewhere. And it's just something that I do kind of as a reminder when I get to a tough spot in a race. And it just is like, if I glance down at my watch to see what a split is or something, I might have it written next to my watch or on the inside of my palm. And it's just a reminder of like what I'm striving to achieve. And it just helps me to kind of get through those rough patches. And so it's kind of something that I always fall back on.
Yeah, I love
and
that.
then it's also a good reminder just of like, when I started running, when I got into running, where that initial passion came from, my high school coach who was really motivating a lot of different ways for me. And so it's just kind of a reminder of all of that stuff. And it just brings back really good memories, which I think can be really helpful in a race.
That's cool. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. All right. And where can people find out more about you in the future if they want to follow along?
So the biggest platforms I use are Instagram and social and Twitter. So my handle is the same on both of those. It's just at Matt Llano, LLANO. I also have a website, mattllano.com, that I don't update quite as much as I probably should, but I'm getting better about it. But yeah, Instagram and Twitter are probably two of the best options to find me.
Okay, cool. Well, I will put links in the show notes. Matt, thank you so much for being honest with us, for just sharing your story, your passion, everything. We've really appreciated it and learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciated the chat. Thanks so much.
Oh, I just love that. Yet another person I connected so well with. And I'm sure a lot of what he was saying sounded very familiar to you. And I'm sure you appreciated his openness and just his viewpoints on the situation he's been in. I can't wait to cross paths with Matt at some point in the future. And who knows, maybe it will be at Boston someday. We will see. You can find links to everything we talked about in the show notes at tinamuir.com/episode 69. And if you do try out the Hoka One Clifton 5s, let me know what you think. And also let me know if you have a pair and you decide to throw them at a friend to see how much they flinch, because that's how you know whether they've tried it, right? Actually, don't throw shoes at them. Don't tell people I am telling you to throw shoes at people. I am just kidding. Next week, we will have Dr. Emily Krause on the show to talk about hip and pelvic injuries, amongst other things. We focus a lot on lower leg injuries in a lot of injury prevention and injury struggle stuff that we go through, but we also hear that hips are the center of everything and they're really important to strengthen. So we should focus on them more, and Emily is a great person to talk about that. She works as the sports medicine physician at Stanford, so you know she knows her stuff. Tune in next week to hear more, and have a great week.
Thanks for listening to the Running for Real podcast. Be sure to check out tinamuir.com for show notes and even more helpful running information.